The galaxy had always looked at Earth with amusement. From the massive space fleets of advanced civilizations to the ancient alien species who roamed the stars, humans were seen as insignificant. Their cities were small, their technology basic, and their history a mere blip in the grand timeline of the universe. The aliens had long thought that humans had no place among the stars. To them, Earth was just another planet to be ignored. It was a peaceful day on Earth when everything began to change. A group of scientists, deep within an old, forgotten library, uncovered an artifact that had been buried for millennia. The artifact was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. It was a small, stone-like object with strange markings carved into its surface. It seemed to pulse with energy, though no one could tell where the energy came from or what it meant. Dr. Claire Summers, a leading linguist, was the first to examine the object. As she looked at the markings, a strange sensation washed over her. The symbols seemed to whisper to her, urging her to speak. At first, she hesitated. The language was unlike any she had ever encountered. It was ancient, but it was also familiar in some way. There was something deeply primal about it, as though it was buried deep in human history, a forgotten language lost to time. Driven by an impulse she couldn't understand, Dr. Summers began to repeat the symbols aloud. As her voice echoed through the silent room, the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. The air around her grew dense, charged with energy, as though something ancient was waking up. The markings on the artifact glowed faintly, and for the briefest moment, the room seemed to warp, as if the laws of time and space had bent in response to the words she spoke. Unbeknownst to Dr. Summers, her voice was carrying across the stars. On distant planets, alien civilizations that had long watched Earth began to feel an unsettling disturbance. Their sensors picked up strange signals, but nothing could explain it. Something had been triggered on Earth, something they feared. The first to react were the Zorathians, a race of ancient beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Their empires spanned across galaxies, and they had seen countless species rise to power and fall into dust. They had watched humanity with curiosity, but never concern. After all, how could a species of hairless creatures, with no space-faring technology, ever pose a threat? But now, as their ships floated silently in deep space, they began to feel the weight of something they hadn't felt in centuries: fear. The strange language that had been spoken on Earth had triggered something in the deep recesses of their memories, something they had forgotten. The Zorathians were not the only ones who reacted. Across the galaxy, every alien species who had once laughed at humanity began to feel the same cold sensation creeping into their minds. On Earth, the scientists had no idea of the consequences of their actions. They were excited by their discovery, but Dr. Summers felt uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had been awakened, something powerful and dangerous. As she stared at the glowing artifact, her heart raced. The whispers of the ancient language seemed to echo louder now, as though calling her to say more. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the energy dissipated. The room fell silent. The artifact's glow faded, and everything seemed normal again. But Dr. Summers knew something had changed. The world would never be the same. Far above Earth, in the darkness of space, alien ships were already gathering. They had been watching for centuries, but now they had a reason to act. The humans had done something they should never have done. The language spoken by Dr. Summers was not just any language. It was the language of the first civilizations, the language of the very beings who had once ruled the stars. And the one thing every alien species feared was the return of those ancient beings. The first warning came from a scout ship, its sensors blinking urgently. The aliens were aware now. They had heard the call. The question was no longer whether humanity would survive, but what would happen if the humans awakened the forgotten powers of the universe. Dr. Summers stared at the artifact in her hands, unaware of the storm she had just set into motion. The laughter of the aliens, who had once mocked Earth and its people, had turned into something far darker. The humans had unknowingly opened the door to an ancient force, and it was now up to them to face the consequences. But for the first time in history, the humans were not afraid. They had spoken the language no one should know. They had done something no one had ever expected. And now, the galaxy would learn that Earth was no longer the insignificant speck it had once been. As the alien ships prepared for their descent upon Earth, the humans had no idea that they were on the brink of a new chapter in their history, a chapter that would either see them rise to power or be crushed beneath the weight of the stars. The galaxy was no longer laughing at humanity. Now, they were watching with fear, and in the depths of space, ancient forces began to stir. The game had changed, and no one, especially the aliens, could have predicted what would come next. The once silent skies around Earth were now alive with tension. Alien civilizations that had long dismissed humanity as insignificant were suddenly on alert. In the deepest reaches of space, ships from different species began to move toward Earth. These species had seen civilizations rise and fall over millennia, but they had never expected to witness the awakening of a force they thought was long buried. Until now. Back on Earth, Dr. Claire Summers couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. The ancient artifact she had uncovered had sparked something the universe had feared. The faint glow from the stone had faded, but the sensation of power in the air hadn't disappeared. It lingered, like an invisible shadow following her every move. She had been in contact with her colleagues at the scientific facility, but there was no word yet on what exactly had happened. Had they discovered something that could change the fate of humanity? Or had they simply unearthed a relic from the past that should have been left forgotten? Dr. Summers wasn't sure, but she couldn't ignore the creeping sense that the consequences of their discovery were far greater than any of them could have anticipated. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, a council of alien leaders convened. The Zorethians, ancient and proud, had long dominated the stars. They had seen wars fought over power, but this was different. They were not worried about another species rising to challenge their authority. They were worried about the return of something older than time itself. They had spent centuries hiding from a secret they feared, one that humanity had unknowingly unleashed. "Prepare the fleet," the Zorathian commander ordered. "The humans have done something they should never have done. Their actions could bring about the very force we've spent generations hiding from. We must act before it's too late." The Council of Alien Leaders agreed. They had no choice but to prevent humanity from discovering more. If the humans uncovered more of the lost language, it could awaken the ancient forces that the galaxy had feared for eons. Forces that even the most powerful alien species couldn't control. Back on Earth, as Dr. Summers and her colleagues continued to study the artifact, they began to notice strange occurrences. Communication systems were failing. Power grids flickered in and out. Some of the more sensitive research equipment registered strange energy spikes. It was as though the artifact itself was drawing power from Earth's core, feeding off the planet's energy to awaken something greater. But no one on Earth could understand the significance of what was happening. The governments were busy dealing with more immediate threats, such as political unrest and environmental concerns. The discovery of the artifact had not yet made global headlines. Only a few people knew about it, those in the scientific community who had gathered to study it. Dr. Summers, driven by a mix of curiosity and unease, had been studying the markings on the artifact for hours. As she traced the symbols with her fingers, she noticed something strange. The markings were shifting, slowly at first, as if they were responding to her touch. It was subtle but undeniable. She wasn't sure if it was a trick of the light or something more, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that the artifact was alive. "Then we won't fail," Dr. Summers replied, more to herself than to anyone else. The words they were about to speak were humanity's only hope, humanity's last chance to stop the alien invaders. Without another word, the countdown began. On the screens, a sequence of symbols flashed, those symbols that humanity had learned to understand and master. The final piece, the most powerful phrase, was displayed in its full glory. It was no longer just a language. It was a key to the very fabric of existence, capable of bending the laws of nature itself. Dr. Summers inhaled deeply. This is it. She spoke the first part of the phrase. The world seemed to hold its breath as the ancient words vibrated through the command center, a wave of energy rippling outward. The language, the ancient weapon, had been unleashed. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The lights in the command center flickered, but that was normal under such high tension. The Zorethian ships, which had been closing in, now stopped. Their massive forms hovered in the sky like silent giants. Then came the shift. A low hum filled the air, followed by a sudden crackling sound like static electricity building up. "We're reading a massive surge of energy," Dr. Lawson said, his eyes wide with disbelief. It's coming from Earth." But before he could finish, the sky above the Zorethian fleet began to change. The air itself seemed to warp as ripples spread across the atmosphere. Dr. Summers watched in awe as the Zorethian ships, once so certain of their victory, began to tremble. A brilliant beam of energy, unlike anything seen before, shot upward from Earth, connecting the planet's surface to the alien armada. The Zorethians were taken off guard. Their ships began to lose stability as the beam of energy distorted their advanced technology. Their shields flickered and malfunctioned. The once impenetrable fleet now appeared vulnerable, their weapons rendered ineffective. We're winning," Dr. Summers whispered, a mix of disbelief and triumph in her voice. The language, this impossible weapon, was working. The Zorethians were losing their grip on Earth, and for the first time in days, there was hope. But this was no simple victory. The language had only been a part of the equation. The consequences were becoming clear, and as the power of the words intensified, something far darker began to emerge. Dr. Summers felt it. Something deep within the language was shifting, something they hadn't anticipated. The words they had spoken were not only weakening the Zorethians, but they were also changing Earth itself. The ground began to shake. The sky above them twisted as if reality itself were being rewritten. The energy emanating from Earth wasn't just a defense. It was a signal, a beacon to something far older, far more powerful than the Zorethians. Dr. Summers' heart pounded as she realized the full extent of what they had done. They had unlocked not just an ancient weapon, but an ancient force, one that might not recognize humanity's right to wield it. "We need to stop this," Dr. Summers said, panic creeping into her voice. "The language, it's calling something." "It's too late," Dr. Lawson said. "The force is already beyond our control." Suddenly, a deep, rumbling voice boomed across the skies. It wasn't human, nor was it Zorethian. It was ancient, far older than anything they had encountered. It spoke in the language they had just unlocked. The words were unintelligible, yet they carried weight. The ground trembled as though the planet itself was responding to the command. "We've opened a door," Dr. Summers realized, her eyes wide with fear and awe. "And something is coming through." From the dark expanse of space, a new presence emerged. It was not a Zorethian ship, nor anything that humanity had ever seen. The very fabric of the cosmos seemed to warp around it. The alien fleets, now stranded and helpless, watched in terror as the entity approached. And it was clear that this new arrival did not care about the Zorethian or the humans. It cared only about one thing, its ancient power, awakened once again. The words were clear, yet cryptic. Dr. Summers felt the weight of their meaning settling upon her. The Zorethians, too, seemed to sense the significance of the moment, their leaders trembling. The entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. "We've done it," Dr. Lawson said, his voice shaking. "We've awakened something that will either save us or destroy us." The Zorethians, realizing that they could not control the entity, turned to Dr. Summers, their last hope. "Help us," one of their commanders pleaded. We were wrong. We sought power, But now we see that we have unleashed something we cannot understand. Help us, and we will serve you. We will make amends for our mistakes." Dr. Summers stood motionless, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The Zorathians had been the aggressors, but now they were at their mercy. This was humanity's chance to either end the war and secure peace, or to risk everything by bargaining with the unknown. The entity, still hovering above, did not speak again. Its presence was all-consuming, waiting for a response. And then the voice returned. "Time is running out. The choice is yours. Decide quickly, for the galaxy is on the brink of a new era. Will you stand with the old ways, or will you forge a new path?" Dr. Summers turned to her team, who were all watching her, waiting for a command. It was a moment of unprecedented power, and it was now in her hands. She had to make a choice, not just for Earth, but for the future of all species. "We will stand with the old ways," Dr. Summers said firmly. "But we will also create something new. We will lead the galaxy into an age of peace, not by force, but by unity. We are the bridge between the past and the future." The entity's voice boomed in approval. "Then you shall be the leaders of the new age. You shall carry the knowledge of the ancient ones into the stars." With that, the entity began to dissipate, its form slowly fading as it merged with the fabric of space. The Zorathian fleet, now broken and subdued, watched as their once unstoppable empire crumbled. Humanity had survived, but their victory was not complete. It had only just begun. As the skies cleared and Earth's future seemed uncertain, Dr. Summers knew one thing: the galaxy would never be the same. The ancient language had unlocked something greater than anyone could have imagined. And humanity, the species once considered weak, had now taken its place at the center of a new, unprecedented era. For better or for worse, humanity had spoken the language no one should have known. And in doing so, they had rewritten the very future of the galaxy. She activated the comm system, sending a message to the remaining military command stations. Earth was preparing for war. The first step was clear: gather the scientists and engineers, those who could decipher more of the language's structure. The second step was even clearer: prepare Earth for an all-out assault. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Zorathian leader, General Clore, seethed with fury. His golden eyes glowed with rage as he watched the data streams report back to him. The artifact had triggered something none of them had expected: a disruption in their technology. The humans had done something they shouldn't have been able to do. They had awakened an ancient force that could alter the fabric of the universe itself. "Prepare the fleet," General Clore barked. "We will not let this stand. The humans must be eradicated before their power grows beyond our control." Clore's fleet was vast, and its firepower was unmatched. But he knew there was something he had underestimated: the humans. They were resourceful, unpredictable, and most dangerously, they had discovered the language of the ancients. Back on Earth, Dr. Summers and her team worked day and night, deciphering more of the language's complexities. Each new discovery sent ripples of understanding through their ranks, unlocking new abilities, new ways of manipulating the world around them. It was as if the very laws of physics could be rewritten by speaking the right words. But there were dangers. As they explored the language's full scope, they began to realize that the power it contained could be used for destruction as well as creation. The language was a double-edged sword, and if used incorrectly, it could tear apart everything humanity had worked to build. "Are we sure we're ready for this?" Dr. Summers questioned as she stared at the glowing symbols on the screen. She was aware of the gravity of their mission. Every word spoken had consequences. Every choice made could tip the balance one way or another. One of the lead scientists, Dr. Lawson, looked up from his research, his face pale. "I'm not sure anyone could be fully ready for what we're about to do, but it's the only choice we have. We're the only ones who can stop them." Dr. Summers nodded solemnly. "We have to control the power before they do." The Zorathian fleet was on the move again, and they were bringing reinforcements, more ships, more soldiers. Earth had only one chance to counter the alien threat before it was overwhelmed. The ancient language was their weapon, but it was also their vulnerability. Humanity's only hope was to master it, and fast. As the days passed, the tension grew. The clock was ticking. The Zorathians would arrive in a matter of days. Earth had no time to waste. Every moment counted. Dr. Summers and her team raced to learn as much as they could, trying to unlock more of the language's secrets before the inevitable assault began. Finally, the moment came. The Zorathian fleet entered Earth's orbit, their ships casting shadows over the planet's surface. The time for learning was over. Earth would either survive, or it would be destroyed. In a darkened room, deep within Earth's military command center, Dr. Summers stared at the screens, her heart pounding in her chest. The alien fleet was closing in. She had one last task to perform: to transmit the language across Earth's military network. The time had come to use the words not just as a tool, but as a weapon. "We're ready," Dr. Summers said, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. She had no idea what would happen when the words were spoken, but she knew they had no other choice. The countdown to Earth's survival began. The air in Earth's command center was thick with anticipation. Dr. Summers stood at the helm of the global defense operations, the final piece of the ancient language pulsing on the screen in front of her. The Zorathian fleet loomed just outside Earth's atmosphere, their massive warships casting long, dark shadows across the planet's surface. Humanity had done everything it could, but the question remained: would it be enough? She turned to her team, each one of them tightly gripping their stations, eyes locked on the screens in front of them. The final command was simple: speak the words. "Are we ready?" Dr. Summers asked, her voice steady, though a storm of anxiety brewed inside her. Dr. Lawson, who had become her closest ally in these final days, nodded gravely. "We've decoded everything, but we still don't know the full extent of the language's power. The Zorathians don't just have advanced technology, they have centuries of knowledge. If we fail here, it's over." With a trembling hand, she activated the research console, running simulations to decode the markings. As she did, a faint whisper filled the room. It was not in any language she recognized, but it seemed familiar. It was the same sound that had filled her mind when she first spoke the ancient language. A voice echoed in her head, telling her to continue, a command she couldn't resist. Without fully understanding the consequences, Dr. Summers entered the next sequence of symbols into the system, speaking the words aloud as they appeared on the screen. The room trembled again. A shockwave of energy surged through the lab, sending ripples across the air. The artifact glowed brighter, its energy now fully awakened. The moment she spoke the final word, the lab fell silent. Dr. Summers stood frozen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Her colleagues, who had been in another room, rushed in, startled by the strange event. "What just happened?" one of the researchers asked, his voice shaking. But before Dr. Summers could respond, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A deep, resonating hum filled the air, and the walls seemed to pulse. Outside, the skies darkened as ships from the distant corners of the galaxy converged on Earth, their massive forms blocking out the stars. It was then that Dr. Summers realized they were not alone. "Get to the safe zone," one of the other scientists yelled. "This is not just a scientific breakthrough. It's a warning." But it was too late. As the ships moved into position, the first transmission was received from the Zorathians. It was a coded message, one that echoed with the same ancient language they had feared. The Zorathians had decoded the message, and now they knew what Earth had awakened. "Humanity has awoken the dead language." The Zorathian leader's voice boomed across the transmission. "You have opened the gates of the past. We are coming to stop you, for you are no longer safe." Dr. Summers stared at the screen, her heart racing. The galaxy had noticed them, and it wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. The Zorathians and other alien forces were coming, not just to conquer, but to erase the threat humanity now posed to the universe. But Dr. Summers knew one thing for sure. The humans had discovered something that could change the course of history. The language they had spoken was the key to something more powerful than they had ever imagined. And now, the galaxy would know what humans were truly capable of. As the Zorathian fleet neared Earth's atmosphere, a deep sense of unease spread through the scientific community. Dr. Summers and her colleagues were locked in their lab, staring at the screen as the alien transmission echoed through the room. The words, spoken in a language humans could not understand, were now haunting their thoughts. The Zorathians knew. They knew what humanity had unlocked, and they knew it was too dangerous to let Earth continue down this path. The Earth had become a target. Dr. Summers felt the weight of it all. The artifact, once thought to be just a relic of ancient history, had revealed its true purpose. The markings on its surface, which she had thought were nothing more than decorative symbols, were actually a key to a lost language, an ancient language capable of unlocking forces that even the galaxy's most advanced species feared. The Zorathians' warning had confirmed it. Humanity had tapped into a power far beyond their understanding. But Dr. Summers couldn't stop herself. She was too far in now. The language had called to her, and she had spoken it. Now there was no going back. She didn't fully grasp the scope of what she had done, but she knew it was bigger than anything Earth had ever faced before. As the first alien ships began to land, a sense of dread washed over the planet. People everywhere had heard the news. Governments scrambled to form alliances, but it was clear that the human race was ill-prepared for what was coming. The Zorathians, along with the mysterious forces they had warned about, were coming for the one thing that could change the balance of power in the galaxy, the language that humanity had unlocked. Dr. Summers knew the clock was ticking. The moment the Zorathians arrived, they would seek to erase every trace of the ancient language, preventing humanity from using it again. And with it, they would erase humanity's only chance to defend itself. The alien ships landed with terrifying precision, their sleek, armored forms casting long shadows over cities around the world. From the moment they touched down, the air seemed to crackle with energy. The humans had no idea how to react. The world had been plunged into a state of confusion and fear. Who were these aliens? Why had they come? And why did they fear the very language humanity had spoken? Dr. Summers, a cold voice, spoke from the door. It was the leader of the Zorathian fleet. His tall, imposing figure filled the doorway. His golden eyes glinted with authority. "You've caused us much trouble. Hand over the artifact, and we'll consider your life." Dr. Summers' mind raced. She had to think fast. There was no way she could defeat the Zorathians. They were too powerful, their technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. But the artifact, it held the key. It held the secret to the ancient language, the language that no one was supposed to understand. She couldn't let them take it. Not now. Not after everything humanity had gone through. The Zorathian leader took a step forward, his soldiers flanking him. He extended a hand, his voice cold and commanding. "Give it to me, and we can avoid further conflict. You will not win. Humanity is weak." Dr. Summers clenched her fists. She couldn't let the galaxy's most powerful species control the fate of humanity. She had to act. But what could she do? In a moment of desperation, she turned to the terminal once again. The language, it had to be spoken aloud. There was no other way to activate its full potential. Taking a deep breath, she muttered the first words that came to her mind, the ones she had heard when the artifact first activated. At first, nothing happened. The room was still. The Zorathians watched her with amusement, thinking she was just trying to delay the inevitable. Then the air began to vibrate. The artifact in her hands grew warm, its symbols glowing with an eerie light. The ground beneath her feet trembled. The Zorathian's eyes widened in disbelief. The language, it was alive. The Zorathian leader stepped back in alarm. "What have you done?" The walls around them seemed to pulse with the energy that the language had awakened. A dark energy, ancient and powerful, filled the room. The ground cracked beneath them, and a hum of power spread out from the artifact, filling the air with a strange, otherworldly sound. The Zorathians took a few steps back, their weapons raised, unsure of what was happening. The force in the room seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was as if the very fabric of space had been altered. Nothing like this had ever been seen before. Not even the Zorathians, with all their advanced technology, could comprehend what was happening. Impossible, the Zorathian leader whispered. No species should have this power. Dr. Summers stood her ground, gripping the artifact tightly. She had unlocked something that no one in the galaxy had ever thought possible. The ancient language was not just a tool, it was a weapon. And now, Earth had it. Before she could fully grasp the magnitude of what was happening, the Zorathians began to retreat. Their eyes were filled with fear. They had never encountered anything like this before. The language, humanity's language, was changing the very nature of the universe around them. But Dr. Summers knew this was just the beginning. The Zorathians would not give up easily. They would return, and they would bring even more powerful forces to bear. But for now, Earth had the upper hand. As the alien soldiers fled, Dr. Summers allowed herself a moment of relief. The artifact, now glowing brighter than ever, had become a beacon of hope for humanity. But she knew that this victory was only temporary. The real battle had just begun. The Zorathian fleet had retreated, but the calm was short-lived. Dr. Summers knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. She stood in the heart of the underground lab, the artifact glowing with power in her hands, its energy pulsing through her. She could feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, the knowledge that the fate of Earth now rested in her hands. The language, the ancient language of the forgotten species, was more than just a means of communication. It was a force, a living entity that bent reality itself. No one had understood its full potential until now. But humanity had spoken the words. They had awakened the storm. Dr. Summers glanced at the data streams running across the screens before her. The Zorathians were regrouping, preparing for their next move. They would not rest until they had the artifact in their possession. They knew it could shift the balance of power in the galaxy, and they wouldn't allow that to remain in human hands. "I can't let them win," she muttered to herself, determination hardening her resolve. She understood now. The language was their weapon, but it could also be their shield. If the Zorathians were to be defeated, humanity would need to learn to control it, to harness its power fully before the alien forces returned. In the command center of the Zorathian fleet, the leader of the invasion spoke to his officers, his voice cold and commanding. "Prepare for the search. We will find the humans who spoke the language. We will extract the knowledge they have uncovered, and we will make sure no one else can use it. This is the final warning. Humanity must be stopped." The Zorathians weren't the only ones watching. Other alien species, some older and more powerful than the Zorathians, were also aware of humanity's discovery. The humans had unlocked the ancient language that had been buried for millennia, a language capable of tapping into unimaginable power. And the galaxy would do whatever it took to stop them from using it. Meanwhile, Dr. Summers continued her research, determined to learn as much as she could about the language before the aliens could destroy it. She had begun to piece together some of the key elements of the language, but it was fragmented, incomplete. She needed more knowledge, more clues, more pieces to the puzzle. But as the days went by, the alien presence on Earth grew stronger. Earth's military forces were no match for the advanced technology of the Zorathians, and any attempt to fight back seemed futile. The aliens had complete control of the skies. Cities were being evacuated, and a sense of panic gripped the world. No one knew what to do. The war had started, but it felt like humanity was already losing. Dr. Summers felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She was the one who had awoken this power, and now she had to do everything she could to protect it. She couldn't let the aliens erase the knowledge humanity had uncovered, but time was running out. As she worked tirelessly in the lab, trying to decode the final pieces of the ancient language, she couldn't shake the feeling that the aliens weren't just coming for the language. They were coming for her. She had spoken the words, the very words that had awoken this ancient force. She was now the key to everything. One night, as she stayed late in the lab, a quiet alert sounded from her console. A transmission was coming through. It was coded, but she recognized the pattern instantly. It was a message from Earth's government. "Dr. Summers," the voice on the other end said urgently, "you need to leave the lab. The aliens have begun their search. They're coming for you." Her heart raced. The realization hit her hard. The aliens weren't just interested in the language. They were after her. She was the one who had unlocked its power, and now she was their target. Before she could respond, the lights in the lab flickered. The hum of alien ships in the sky could be heard even through the thick walls of the building. The Zorathians had arrived. Dr. Summers didn't hesitate. She grabbed the ancient artifact, the key to everything, and rushed out of the lab. She knew she had to get to safety, but she also knew one thing: she couldn't run forever. The language had awoken something, and it was only a matter of time before the galaxy's most powerful species would stop at nothing to take it back. Dr. Summers ran through the dark corridors of the lab complex, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the artifact heavy in her arms. The Zorathians had arrived. The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back. She reached the underground storage bay, where the government had hidden some of the most classified equipment. She wasn't sure what she could do with it, but she had to try. The artifact was the key to everything. She knew the Zorathians wouldn't stop until they had it in their hands, and they would stop at nothing to get it. As she reached a secure terminal, she quickly plugged in the device, hoping to access the encrypted data that had been stored on the artifact. The screen flickered for a moment before a message appeared. Access granted. The language was there. The symbols, the sounds, everything that humanity had uncovered was available to her now. Dr. Summers took a deep breath. It was as if the words on the screen were calling to her, urging her to speak them. But she hesitated. She had already spoken it once. She had awoken something that should have remained buried. Before she could act, the door behind her slammed open. The heavy footsteps of alien soldiers echoed in the hallway. Her blood ran cold. They had found her. She quickly grabbed the artifact and hid it under her coat. The Zorathians had arrived. The atmosphere on Earth's command center was suffocating. Tension hung thick in the air, palpable to everyone present. Dr. Summers stood at the helm, staring at the vast screens before her. The entity they had unwittingly called forth from the depths of time now hovered above the planet, its presence too vast to fully comprehend. The Zorathian fleet, once mighty and unstoppable, now appeared insignificant before this ancient power. The alien armada had been reduced to mere spectators, their weapons and technology failing under the influence of the unknown force. But the real question remained: what now? Is it speaking to us? Dr. Summers asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Lawson stood beside her, his expression frozen with a mix of awe and fear. "Yes," he whispered, "in the same language we just activated, but it's not like anything we've heard before. It's older, more powerful." The Zorathians, who had once thought themselves the masters of the galaxy, were now kneeling before the unknown entity, powerless. Their arrogance had led them to underestimate humanity's resilience, and now they were witnessing the consequences of their own hubris. But as the ancient force loomed closer, humanity was faced with an even greater challenge. "Do you think it will help us?" Dr. Summers asked, her eyes not leaving the shimmering form above. Dr. Lawson turned to her, his voice low. "I don't know. It doesn't seem to care about us. It's focused on something else. Something much older." The Zorathians, sensing the same uncertainty, began to shift nervously. They knew they had no chance against the entity now. Their technology, their weapons, all of it had been rendered useless in the face of this ancient power. But there was no telling what the entity wanted, and if humanity could somehow control it, or even negotiate with it, their survival depended on it. Without warning, the entity spoke again, its voice a deep rumble that echoed through space, shaking the very foundations of Earth. It spoke in the same language that had awakened it, a language no one on Earth had ever known. And yet, somehow, Dr. Summers understood. The Ancient Ones have returned. The voice boomed, its tone filled with authority and inevitability. And you, humans, are the key. A shiver ran down Dr. Summers' spine. The key to what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The entity responded in a way that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. It showed them glimpses of a forgotten history, of civilizations long extinct, and of forces that had shaped the very fabric of the universe. It revealed a hidden truth, one that no one could have ever predicted. Humans were not just survivors. They were something more. They had been chosen. We were created for a purpose, the entity's voice echoed, resonating in their minds. You are the inheritors of the ancient will. You must choose. Join the cycle or become a part of the forgotten.